Really, there's nothing to be afraid of, Amy. The child curled into the corner, making herself as small as possible. Her thin arms were so rigid Liz could not pry them away, even using all her strength. The child seemed paralyzed, in shock, as if she'd been bitten by something poisonous. Amy, it's all right. They're not going to hurt you. Amy turned her head stiffly and looked up through a mop of thick black hair. Everybody's always talking spider talk. Always trying to make me afraid. I can't stand it, Miss Malloy. Liz thought that a strange way to put it. But then Amy was a highly nervous, anxious little girl. The tension in her often made her word choices and even her tone of voice sound strange. They had been studying spiders this month in school, and Liz had gone to the trouble of setting up a terrarium with 2 tarantulas in the classroom. Today, the other kids had been teasing Amy. Amy was terrified of spiders, even when they're just talking about them. When Liz lectured the class, Amy would lay her hand on the desk. Of course, most of the other children were a bit nervous around the terrarium, but Amy had always been an easy target, and she served ably to help the others forget their own fears. It's okay, Amy. The other kids are gone now. It's just you and me. Your mother will be here to pick you up soon. Let's just get up and wait for her, okay? Okay, Amy said into her arms. With a great deal of effort, she unwound herself and stood up steadily. Liz moved her gently by the shoulders, maneuvering her around the table with the terrarium to the windows beyond. Amy pressed against her firmly as they passed the table, both arms wrapped tight and monkey-like around Liz's thighs. For some reason, the desperation in the child's grip, the completeness of the child's embrace, gave Liz the creeps. Liz suppressed a tremor until they reached the windows, then delicately but forcefully removed the child's arms. Liz would normally be home by now, but since Amy's parents had undergone a rather messy divorce, that she was under strict instructions from Amy's mother and her principal that she was to wait until Amy's mother picked her up. Amy's father was not permitted on the school grounds. Liz was not aware of all the details, but she did know that the father had been denied visitation rights, which was unusual in that small community. He hurt me sometimes, Amy had told her once, out of the blue, in the response to some question Liz had asked her totally off that subject. The child did that at times when she was really agitated. She had to make the slow down and think before you could follow what she was talking about. Liz had never met such a high-strung, fearful little girl. She wanted to reach out to the child while at the same time she was vaguely repelled by her. Perhaps she reminded her somewhat of herself. As a girl, Liz had been painfully thin and afraid of almost everything. No wonder the other children did not like Amy. They had not liked Liz either. That's not my mommy's car. The child's voice was so unusually flat, so emotionless that Liz at first could not understand what she was saying. Then the child was suddenly screaming, It's not her car! Amy, calm down! Liz looked out the window. It was near dusk. The sun had just begun to set, the worst time of the day for visibility. Especially from these windows facing the sun, filling with red and orange light, trying to see through these windows into the gray-filled space between the school and the trees beyond was almost impossible in the late afternoons. But she could just barely make out something today. A squat black car, a Volkswagen, she thought, slowly circling the visitors' parking lot. It stopped about 10 yards away from the window. A tall, thin figure stepped out dressed in gray sweatpants and a stained darker sweatshirt. She could not make out the face. The figure stood very still, staring at the window. Daddy! Amy gasped. The figure walked slowly forward. Again, Amy began to scream. The girl's rising screams panicked Liz. She turned and ran out the door, and the strength of the little girl's voice terrifying her, spurring her on. There were only 2 entrances to the small school building. In a few minutes, Liz had locked both and returned to the classroom. She locked her classroom door and returned to the window. Amy was silent now, staring out the window, her forehead pressed against the glass, and then Liz had to stop and wonder why she herself had become so frightened. She never met the man personally, and she certainly had no evidence that he might harm either one of them. The black car was gone. Liz started to pull away, to go to the other side of the building and look there, but she hesitated to leave Amy alone. She felt like a fool. She got so scared when Amy screamed and had not realized she could have called the police from the principal's office. "Come on, Amy, I'm taking you to another room." Liz pushed her past the terrarium, noting how agitated the normally placid tarantula seemed. She watched their legs rising and falling into the still air of the terrarium. So many legs, it seemed. Many more than 8, she might have thought. She found herself pulling away from them as she passed. She'd always been frightened of spiders herself. One of the many unreasoning fears that still clung from her childhood. That was the main reason that every school year she'd done this lesson on spiders. Although the fear was still there under the surface, the lesson helped her control it. And yet now, with the black Volkswagen moving slowly through the dusk out there, perhaps even now circling the building searching for a way in, she could not believe she had so calmly held one of these creatures in her hand that very afternoon. They reached the door, opened it, and Liz pushed Amy out into the hall. Amy began to scream. When Liz rushed to the girl's side, she found her staring at the end of the hallway, at the glass entrance doors there, which were now filled with glare of headlights. A car had pulled up head-on against the door, only a few inches away. The glare obscured its form. Liz expected the car to come crashing through those doors at any moment. She grabbed Amy and pulled her back into the classroom, again locking the door. Once inside, she shoved one of the work tables against the door, as well as several other children's books. She grabbed the table holding the terrarium, began to shove it, then saw the glass case begin to crack simultaneously with Amy's loud sobs. She stopped. The terrarium settled into place. Amy flew into her arms, trying to wrap wiry legs around her thighs, both bony arms around her neck. Suddenly, Liz could not breathe. She felt attacked by the child's small limbs, trapped. "Amy!" she gasped, and struggled to pull her off. The girl was crying. "Amy, please!" She slipped her arms around the girl's shoulders and jerked down. Amy fell at Liz's feet, almost hysterical now, her hands clenching and unclenching, needing something to hold. Liz picked her up and carried her to a bench by her desk, and sat down with her, holding her, stroking her dark hair. She stared at the tarantulas, now calm behind their walls of glass. She felt exhausted by her own fear, and drained by this fearful little girl. She remembered she had a date with Roger tonight. Roger was the one with the sure hands and fierce embraces, who wanted to marry her, too, as he had often said, make her his forever. It did not bother her that he might be worried. She was not even sure why she continued to see him. She had thought she loved him, but somehow he made her afraid, chilled. Liz began to speak slowly, softly, trying to think of lullabies as she talked about the spiders. She held Amy tight as the child began to pull away from her spider talk. No, Amy, it helps to know about what you're afraid of. No. Please, Amy, they can't hurt you. We fix them so they cannot bite. Besides, even in the wild, their bite will not kill you. That's just a story. People are afraid of them just because they look so ugly. We're all afraid of ugly things. Things with lots of legs that grab and hold on. All spiders are like that. And when you're afraid of them, it feels like you can see them everywhere. They were standing by the terrarium now, Amy transfixed, gripping Liz's hands. Liz opened the lid and inserted a long rod beneath one of the tarantulas, turning it over. It immediately righted itself, making unbroken progress in its cage crawl, inexorable, driven, mindless in its movements. Liz found that appalling. See how it rights itself? It wants to be left alone, not bothered, just like we do. She removed the rod, careful not to touch the end that touched the spider. The smaller one there is the female. See how she crouches in the dirt, Amy? There's a tunnel under there where she keeps her babies. Amy looked up at her. Yes. Yes, you never thought about spiders having babies, did you? Amy shook her head. Can I see them? The babies? Amy asked. No, not now. We won't want to disturb them, but we will later in the class, I promise. The talk about babies seemed to have done it. Amy looked much more relaxed. She did not even glance at the windows anymore. Liz, however, continued to stare at the larger male spider. Its hairy, bristly legs, the too rapid way it moved. Spiders were damn fertile things, and they wove such beautiful webs. To trap insects, to kill them. It seemed as if they produced life only in order to bring about the death. But wasn't that the terrible truth about all life and birth? Maybe that was the real reason they appalled and frightened her so. They were a perverted reminder of the human condition. When she was a girl in Texas, some of the neighbor kids had doused a tarantula with lighter fluid and set it on fire. The enormous spider had staggered a bit, blazing brightly. Finally, the legs gave out and it collapsed on the ground, and then the fire went out. The other kids poked it, and the shell broke. It had burned from the inside out, all the softness melting away, leaving just the terrible musk. They eat birds. Small mice sometimes, she continues. But they're not dangerous to people. There's no reason to be afraid, Amy. No reason at all. But her fear was a living thing with a mind of its own that would not respond to her own sense of reason. She was afraid of these spiders, as she was afraid of Roger, afraid of little Amy, afraid of the little Volkswagen outside circling the building so slowly, penning her in, trapping her, wrapping its long, bristly, dark legs around her thighs and shoulders, embracing her so roughly, needing her so much. She'd always been afraid as a small child, and as she had grown so had her fear. Now it was bigger than these spiders. No one had been so much help to her with it. Most of her friends just made fun of her. Or made it worse, talking spider talk all the time. Spider talk about spiders, snakes, the dark, and withered old men with ugly eyes and rough hands. Hideous talk. She could sense the small gray spiders in all corners of the room, building their webs, listening, all these small fears lying in wait for her, wherever she went. Once you're afraid of them, they seemed to pop up everywhere. It was true. She behaved illogically, irresponsibly this afternoon, and she always prided herself on being a responsible teacher. It was because she had been so afraid. Her fear had paralyzed her, as if she had been bitten. She went to the window. The sun was setting rapidly. Broad threads of silk were floating down on the darkening sky, the setting sun making them glisten a blood-red color, thousands of them, each silk strand bearing a spider. When Liz was a child, they called it gossamer. Amy's father stood in front of the black Volkswagen, his dark figure hard to see because of the spider talk. He raised his hand. A red and green scarf hung from it like a trophy. Liz had seen that scarf many times. Amy's mother wore it often when she picked up Amy in her old Chevy convertible. The scarf flowed to the ground. Then Liz saw the convertible parked nearby, the shadowed form sprawling half out the door light on, the bright red interior rapidly filling with silk, the spiders traveling.